Good morning, relatives. Hope you all are well. This is part one of a two-part series. Does Creator have anything to say against Christian empire? And I put Christian empire in quotation marks. So to some of us, it might be apparent that for sure, like, Creator doesn't want human empire. Like, that's completely antithetical to how reality operates, right? Like, colonialism is not a good way of being. However, we're gonna kind of dissect it and talk a little bit about prophecy. And maybe what I need to address is the dichotomy that we oftentimes put between Creator on one hand, from an indigenous worldview, and then God, who is usually looked at as a very Judeo-Christian being who sanctions genocide and other atrocities. So we're going to kind of address that. And I hear a lot of our people saying, we only serve one creator, we only serve one God. So if there's only one God, then how can this same God sanction this and at the same time be against it? And that's what I want to address, not only from the standpoint of our traditional ways and our ecological knowledge and all of the prophecies that we have in our old traditions, but also about what the Hebrew writings themselves, the things that have been used, the writings that have been used to further colonial interests, what they have to say about this project. And you'll see it's actually really amazing and really mind-blowing. So when you think of Jesus the Messiah, you likely think of Christianity. And along with Christianity came empire to these lands. That's how it was brought. We can argue all day about whether or not it was meant to be that way or not, but the reality of history is that it came with colonial interests. So what you think of when you hear about this system of thought or people who claim to follow Jesus is genocide, slavery, ethnocentrism, which just means viewing your people group as better than any other people group, aka white supremacy in these lands, toxic patriarchy, and a whole host of other crooked things. And I think it is important that we call these elements by their right name. They're sinister, they're evil, they're crooked, and you would not be wrong to call them such. However, what isn't often mentioned is the fact that our people across the continent, and I'm only going to cite a few examples because, one, for the sake of time, two, because I'm not familiar with all of our prophecies as different tribal nations, only a few, especially Cheyenne and a Zuni prophecy that I came across. And I know there's a lot more. So I'm going to remind everybody at the end of the show, and I'm going to remind them now, if you have any insights or any like prophecies, maybe not even just from here, but maybe even in Europe, predating the Roman colonialism, when Europe was still tribal nations themselves, make us aware of things that we're not familiar with. Share it in the comments. Any other prophecies or any other insights to things that were predicted ahead of time. I also didn't mean to exclude anybody, so if there's any African or Asian nations that have prophecies to share as well, share that. And all prophecy is, for those who might not understand what that is or have misgivings about it, is just revealings or revelations of the future. It's getting a peephole through into the future that you might not otherwise be able to see. And this is so we may know ahead of time what will happen before it does happen. So when it does happen, we'll be prepared to know how to respond. So first I want to start with a Tsista prophecy, a Cheyenne prophecy. There was a man who would become known as Mutsiof, or in English known as sweet medicine. And to our Tsista people and Sutai people, he was a prophet. That is, the Creator gave him a message to give to the people. And Mutsiof, he went up into a mountain, Novos, the hill where the people are taught, as most people know it, Bear Butte. And he went there, Creator brought him there, brought him inside that mountain and taught him things. And he's the one that gave to our people the covenants that we have with Mahil, with Creator. And later on in his life, he gave a prophecy about what would happen, how and what the people would face later on in time, as time progressed. And he saw in his mind that sometime after he was dead, I'm quoting from the Strange Owl family's account of what Motsiof said. He said, I've seen in my mind that sometime after I am dead, and may the time be long, light-skinned bearded men will arrive with sticks spitting fire. They will conquer the land and drive you before them. They will kill the creatures who give you their flesh to eat, that you may live, and they will bring strange creatures for you to ride and eat. They will introduce war and evil, strange sickness and death. They will try and make you forget Mahil, the Creator, and the things I have taught you, and will impose their own alien evil ways. They will take your land little by little until there is nothing left for you. I do not like to tell you this, but you must know. You must be strong when that bad time comes, you men, and particularly you women, because much depends on you, because you are the perpetuators of life, and if you weaken, the Cheyenne will cease to be. Now I've said all there is to say. And that was recorded on Lame Deer Res on 1967. And some of the key elements that you'll notice about that prophecy is that light-skinned bearded men will arrive. Now to the Tsista, first of all, that was not known. A lot of people haven't seen people that have beards, like a lot of hair. A lot of natives don't have a lot of hair on their bodies pre-colonization. And light-skinned men, or people for that matter, to that extent, they hadn't come into contact, at least in a large scale like that. And they also have these sticks spitting fire. And of course, we understand that to be firearms. We understand that to be muskets, cannons, all these different instruments of warfare. It says they'll conquer the land, drive you before them. They'll drive you out of your own lands. They will kill the creatures who give you their own body to eat, so that you may live. There's this sacred connection between the Isivwan, the buffalo, and human beings. And if you know anything about history, they killed off most of these creatures, the buffalo, the bison. They killed them off, and they introduced strange creatures to ride and to eat. Now, these creatures to ride were the moeno, the horses. And the creatures to eat, this would become the vehoetawa, the cattle, the cows. Through these creatures, through eating of that creature, they say the people will get sick and start dying. That's also something that's been fulfilled. They will introduce war and evil, strange sickness and death. If you look at statistics of the Western Hemisphere, 95% of the population was decimated all across the Americas by disease alone. It's a miracle that any of us are still here as indigenous and native peoples. They will try and make you forget Mahil, the Creator, and the things I have taught you, and will oppose their own crooked ways. And this might go into another segue, but how is it that these people who claim to represent God, Creator, the one who made everything in the universe, maybe their picture is different than the picture that the Cheyennes were given of Creator? Maybe it's a different picture. And I think the picture of God ties in to the conversation, because the picture that you hold of God or Creator or reality is what you will ultimately act on. And so if you have a twisted, crooked picture of who the lover and maker of this universe and sustainer of this universe is, you're going to act on that picture that you hold, whether good or bad. They will take your land little by little until there is nothing left for you. And then he goes on and says that you women specifically, you are the perpetuators of life. And through you, we need to protect you, because you are going to be the ones who perpetuate our nation. So that's the Tsista prophecy, or at least the Strange Owl account of that prophecy. And there's many other families that hold on to the oral tradition of that. That prophecy was said probably between 500 and 1,000 years ago, way before the Tsista and Sutayo, the Cheyennes, ever experienced or ever encountered the Westerners. Now I'm going to share another prophecy. This is a Zuni prophecy. And it goes like this. Many years ago, when our grandparents foresaw what our future would be like, they spoke about the prophecies among themselves and passed them on to the children before them. And this is what the people back then, the old days, this is what they had to say before they came into contact. They said that cities will progress and then decay to the ways of the lowest beings. Drinkers of dark liquids will come upon the land, speaking nonsense and filth. Then the end will be near. Population will increase until the land can hold no more. The tribes of humanity will mix. The dark liquids they drink will cause people to fight among themselves. Families will break up, father against children and the children against one another. Maybe when the people have outdone themselves, then maybe the stars will fall upon the land and drops of hot water will rain upon the earth. Or the land will turn under, or our father, the sun, will not rise to start the day. Then our possessions will turn into beasts and devour us all whole. If not, there will be an odor from gases, which will fill the air we breathe, and the end for us will come. But the people themselves will bring upon themselves what they receive. That's a Zuni prophecy. And of course, the dark liquids that they're predicting are spirits, are like alcohol, whiskey, bourbon, and all the other liquids that cause infighting and confusion of the mind. Now, like I said, there are many other prophecies that we could talk about. I'm not familiar with all of them. These are just the ones I'm familiar with and are relevant to the arrival of the Westerner specifically. But it might be surprising to us and to me to find out that the Hebrew scriptures also tell of reigns of oppressive empires and the mayhem they bring upon life. And you may think, Nick, nah, I don't think so. Like, that's a colonial book. I really doubt it has anything to say bad about their colonial projects, or it would have been said, right? Well, hear me out, then decide for yourself. First, however, it's important to understand the context. Scripture, the word scripture just means writings. Just like in English, where you have a movie script, the word script comes from the same root word. And these writings are telling the story of the ancient Hebrews in their place and time in history. And they also dealt with the oppressive empires of their time. Most people know the story of the Egyptians enslaving the Hebrews way back in their history, and how Yahweh, their God, delivered them from the hands of the Egyptians. So they had their fair share of oppressive empires. And then you had Babylon and a whole host of other nations that oppressed the Hebrews. So they had their fair share. Later on, the Romans would come. Point is, they dealt with empire, and they were on the bottom side of power a lot of times. And it's in this context that Daniel, his Hebrew name, is writing, and he's telling what happened in his place and time. And so apparently, if you can read along later on if you like, it's Daniel chapter 2, it's recorded there, book of Daniel chapter 2. And there was a ruler of Babylon. His name was Nebuchadnezzar. And the Babylonians were the empire of the time in that space. And they basically had overcome the Hebrew people. They had destroyed their main city. They had taken a lot of them into captivity. And once they had done this, they made some eunuchs, and they even put some through their Babylonian system of education and changed their names. Probably made it so they couldn't speak their language, had to speak Babylonian. It was a whole, basically, propaganda and brainwashing machine. But it's in this context that Daniel is living and is basically a fugitive from his own lands and is kept captive here. And this ruler Nebuchadnezzar, he has a dream. And the clue is that the creator, the God of the heavens and the earth, is the one that gives him this dream. And he basically has trouble sleeping. His spirit is disgruntled, and he gives his orders to his wise ones and his astrologers, all the ones who are supposed to interpret these things. He tells them, I had a dream and I don't understand it. And he doesn't really remember the dream. But he tells them, if you're so wise and if you have so much power, share with me my dream and then tell me the interpretation. Well, they can't. So his response is basically, if you're not able to do this, I'm going to destroy everything you have. I'm going to destroy you. Like, there's not going to be anything left of your houses. Like, I'm going to destroy all of you. So Daniel at this time has become one of his wise ones. He's basically included within that order to be killed, but Daniel requests that he can speak with Nebuchadnezzar, this ruler. So Yahweh comes to Daniel and reveals to him, basically, this is the vision that I gave to him. I'm going to share with you what it is. So he gives Daniel insight. So he goes before this ruler, Nebuchadnezzar, and he shares with him his dream. And this will probably blow most of you away. It's a powerful prophecy. So there's a statue that Nebuchadnezzar sees. It's a statue of a person, and it's made of all kinds of different metals, right? So you have this head of gold, which is gold, and then you have the chest and arms of silver. You have like thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and then feet of iron and clay. So just imagine this statue that is made up of all these different metals. And as you go from the top down, the metals become harder, but they also become less valuable. So he says plainly to Nebuchadnezzar, he says, this is the dream, this is the interpretation of it. You are the head of gold. He says that very specifically. He said, you Nebuchadnezzar, you and your empire are this head of gold. And then he says there will come another one after you, another empire after you, which will be inferior to you. And of course, if you look through the history, right after Nebuchadnezzar comes a ruler, Belteshazzar, and even records it in the same book. And then Belteshazzar is basically killed by the Medes and the Persians, and the Medes and the Persians take over the Babylonian Empire. History confirms this as well. And after the Medes and Persians, another third ruler of bronze, there's that thighs of bronze. This would become the Greeks, and the Greeks were very well known for their bronze armor. And then after the bronze was the iron legs. And this would be a kingdom that was strong as iron crushes all things. So like iron breaks in pieces, will crush and break in all the pieces. And so this would become known as the Roman Empire. And the Romans were also very well known for their iron armor. They were very powerful. And then at the last part of that vision, there's the feet of iron and clay. Now, what does this mean? Well, if you know anything about the Roman Empire, this is where it all ties into our histories as indigenous peoples to this continent and across the world. The Roman Empire basically disintegrated, and that's why you find the iron still in the feet. There's remnants of that empire still in the statue, still in the feet, but it's also like clay. And in the prophecy itself, basically says, as iron mixes with clay, so also these human beings, they will try to mix and adhere to one another, but it will not happen because iron and clay can't fully combine. They're just, it's not possible. The clay and, try to put iron and clay together. They somewhat get together, but they're not fully united. They can't fully clasp onto each other. And if you know anything about European history, well, let's start with Rome. Rome basically fell in 476 CE. And basically a bunch of different European tribal nations overtook Rome, sacked it, and then the Roman Empire fell, and it was divided between all these different nations, different tribal nations. Now, also around this time came a man named Constantine, and Constantine lived in the late 3rd century and early 4th century. And Constantine basically purported to be a follower of the Messiah, but he was still a Roman emperor. And this man basically turned all the old Roman places of worship where they would worship their deities, and he made those into basilicas. Before this time, the movement, they were basically worshiping anywhere. They were worshiping on the land, they were worshiping in their homes. It didn't matter where you worship because it wasn't about the building. Constantine basically formalized religion, and and he became the Roman emperor of this new Christian religion. Also, because of his influence, Christianity for the first time was sanctioned and allowed in the Roman Empire. At this time, before this time, they were being vehemently persecuted. So this led to the rise of, later on, the Roman Church state, what we would know as the Holy Roman Empire or the Roman Catholic Church. But this is what led to that. And this history is very important because with that Roman Empire, with the Holy Roman Empire, if you know anything about European history later on, because of this history with the Roman state church, the Europeans and the different monarchs, you think about Spain, you think about England, you think about France, their monarchs tried to intermarry. They tried to intermarry to form alliances with each other. And there'd be some success and there'd be some failures, but they were never able to unite Europe again like they did with the Roman Empire. It was never able to come that into fruition. Of course, the Roman state church did crazy and horrible things, but this is what led to the history of European colonialism. This is a prophecy showing that this would happen, right? And so it's basically telling this is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to happen. The Roman state church is going to rise up. And then through that, Europe will expand to the rest of the world and try to expand empire. It's also important to recognize that European empire is just the extension and outworking of the past empires before them, whether it's Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, or Rome. It's just a continuation of that whole enterprise and project all the way up until here in the Western Hemisphere and around the world. And it gets more interesting when we understand that the initial European colonialism brought here back in 1492 through Columbus and others like him was orchestrated through the Roman state church. Isabella, Ferdinand, and the Pope at that time basically gave permission to colonize these lands. And empires after them, including the United States, it's still in law, they would actually cite the papal bull of 1493. And they would cite that as evidence or as, as permission or as proof that they have a right to be here as well as an empire. But it's interesting because you can see this direct link specifically within language of Pontifex Maximus. A lot of people would doubt oh, well, you're bashing, the Roman Catholicism. I'm not against anyone who identifies as Roman Catholic. What I'm against is the system of thought and what is perpetuated around the world. And it's also within this thought that people might discourage me and say, well, how can you say that the Roman state church or Roman Catholicism, the Holy Roman Empire, is a continuation of the Roman Empire? And I would say it's inherent within the title Pontifex Maximus. I mean, if you go on the current Pope's Twitter handle, his current Twitter handle is Pontifex. And let's dialogue a little bit what that Pontifex Maximus means. This title was actually used of Roman emperors in the Roman Empire of old. And I'm quoting here from a website. It's basically a tourist website for the Vatican. And it says, already in the Roman Empire, there were popes in Rome, and after the decline of the Western Roman Empire, they became town lords of Rome. With the coronation of Charlemagne by Pope Leo III, the Holy Roman Empire arose as a successor of the ancient Roman Empire, and in return, the popes were granted a number of ecclesiastical territories, which increased with time. The pontifex is the bridge builder. In a religious sense, the pontifex builds the bridge to the divine, cultivates the faith, and interprets the god or gods in the course of the millenniums. The Pontifex Maximus was the supreme priest. The title can be backtraced up to the 5th century BCE and has been awarded since the 3rd century BCE by election. In the Roman Empire, the emperor exercised the office of Pontifex Maximus. The first pope who claimed the title of Pontifex Maximus was Pope Leo I, Bishop of Rome, since the year 440. The concept of the pontifex has been preserved to our days in the component of the title of the popes, Summus Pontifex. Now, this system of thought of thinking that you can speak on behalf of the Creator as if God himself is you is the whole trajectory of empire and was the trajectory of what would happen on this continent, not only with Columbus and the Spanish Empire and all the different entities of that, but also what would progress into the United States. And we'll talk about that in the next part. But going back to Daniel 2 and the image, a lot of people think, a lot of historians think that this prophecy was said to have been written around 200 BCE, somewhere around there, which would have been in the middle of the Medo-Persian or Greek Empire at the time. Now, historical tradition says that it's probably around 636, I think it is. And that's around the time when Nebuchadnezzar was ruling and when that would have happened. But, a lot of modern scholarship, disagrees with things that they have to have their own slant on it, basically. So regardless if it's 636 or it's 200, that's still at least 1,000 years before the Holy Roman Empire or some of these empires exist, hundreds of years before some of them, and 1,000 years before the Holy Roman Empire. So it's still telling about things that are impossible to tell about unless you have an insider view. And Creator is the only one who has that insider view, knowing the future before it happens. And so with that being said, I want to include the last part of that vision. You may have seen that I didn't include the last part of that vision that Nebuchadnezzar had. And the last part of that vision is actually a stone coming out of the sky. And it strikes that statue at its feet. And it not only destroys that statue, but it also fills to grow the whole earth and becomes a huge mountain. So what this basically means is that the Creator's reign, his way of operating in the world, will destroy these selfish empires that culminate on the backs of others, the slavery of others, and the degradation of others, including not only human beings, but all life, will culminate in destroying those empires and building a reign that is built on the premise of other-centered love. And the one who truly has the power to make it end does and will end it and make empire cease to exist. Power over and against creation will stop existing as a mode of being. The stone destroys the image of cyclical, selfish human empires to bring in a way of operating in a world where only harmony and peace flourish in every direction. That's the good news. So to answer the initial question that I had, is Creator against empire? The emphatic answer is yes, of course. There is no other way to understand it. That's why these prophecies are written, to show that his or her way of being is completely antithetical to empire. So that's the good news. And part 2, we're going to talk about how it manifests itself specifically within the United States and within its colonial project. And I think the main takeaway is that Creator or God is always for the oppressed and never on behalf of the oppressors. But if anyone has any other prophecies or insights to share into this conversation, please share them in the comments or on my Facebook page, the Decolonize the Way Facebook page. We also have this podcast. We have a Twitter page, still building them up. If anyone has any ideas, feel free to inbox me, topic ideas, anything like that. We're on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts for the podcast hosting sites. And of course, like I said, we have our Facebook page, our Twitter. We're going to get an Instagram. We have a Patreon as well. I'm still working on that, so follow that space. But blessings, relatives. I hope this was insightful. I hope it was a blessing. I hope it gave people some new thoughts. If anyone has any additional thoughts or anything that I talk about, feel free to talk about it in the comments. P.S. relatives, I forgot to mention, my biological dad, he is actually doing a lot to improve himself. So I remember where we had talked about him on the introductory episode. He's actually getting help and getting treatment now. So I'm very thankful for that. I just wanted to get that update to show where he's at now in his life and not to just give a negative picture of where he was. So just wanted to add that for those who are wondering maybe about him in the initial episode. All right, that's it. That's all I have to say. Blessings, relatives. And I think the main takeaway is that Creator or God is always for the oppressed and never on behalf of the oppressors.